Welcome back, one and all, to Mystic Radio. I am your host, Spirit Lady Robin Alexis. And remember, Mystic Radio, it's always an experience, never an explanation. So it is up to you to discern if what you hear rings true to you or not. We are not telling you what to think. We're encouraging you to have an open mind and to know, trust, and act upon your own knowing. So, what is so intriguing that I decided to bring Mystic Radio back on the air? I wrote an Amazon best-selling book called A Conversation with Extraterrestrials. I wanted to learn more about other authors who wrote about UFOs. So I bought Amazon best-selling book, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof by Ken Sylvester. My mind was blown reading this book, and frequently the ETs that he was writing about would begin to speak to me telepathically, and it was a tad overwhelming to say the least. So I knew I needed to talk with Ken. I was able to acquire Ken's phone number, and I was so happy when he returned my call. And we began to have some extremely fascinating conversations that literally were out of this world. He would talk about the global UFO incidences, and I would instantly start receiving messages in my head, channeling the extraterrestrials involved at the particular sites he was talking about. So much so that I knew the Mystic Radio community would love to hear them. Now, people who are new to this show, they will be skeptical until something rings true to them, and that's when they'll know that what Ken and I are sharing is the truth. But your journey to how you experience the show is completely up to each individual. But the fact of the matter is, we are not alone. So to keep up with Ken and I in these conversations, I'm going to refer you to our books. You can learn more about Ken Sylvester's book by going to Amazon, and you put in Ken Sylvester, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof, and his book will pop up and you can read about it. And then you can also put in A Conversation with Extraterrestrials by Robin Alexis. And then you can learn about both of our books, and then you'll be able to follow along with this show. And who knows, you may even want to be a guest at some point, and we'll tell you how you can do that later. But right now, I am going to bring on my very special guest, Ken, who will be sharing with us some information about Zimbabwe today. Welcome, Ken.
Welcome, Robin. I'm going to do something a little different today. I'm going to do a short story, and
Ooh.
I'm going to serve it to you sunny side up. First, Robin, the witnesses in this story are short. They're about 4 foot tall. They all come from an elementary school. And the aliens that visit them are short, also about 4 foot tall. This was the first close encounter of the third kind recorded. And it happened in Zimbabwe, South Africa. It all started around 10 a.m. The kids were out for recess playing on the playground. This was on September 16th, 1966. And it was at the Ariel School in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, South Africa. And just 2 days before, there were numerous reports about UFOs. They saw 3 of them. They were silver-shaped, silver-colored, disc-shaped UFOs. And the calls came from the locals, which in that area are mostly farmers. Then on the morning of September 16th, around 60 students playing out during recess. The teachers were inside for a staff meeting. Some of the students, they started pointing towards the sky. They saw 3 silver disc-shaped flying saucers, as they call them, UFOs. One ship starts to land right next to the playground. They land, a ramp comes down, 2 aliens walk down the ramp. They're dressed in black uniforms, tight-fitting, very fashionable for aliens. And they are, of course, short dudes, about the same size as the kids. Some kids, of course, were scared, and they ran away, and they ran back into the school, telling their teachers there were flying saucers on the playground. And the teachers are like, yeah, okay, sit down and get back to doing your schoolwork. So the curious students stayed. They appeared mesmerized by the aliens. One of the aliens, there were two of them, walks forward, and one of the girls steps a little closer, not afraid. They are friendly aliens, and they're not afraid either. And they're the same sizes as kids, and maybe that's why they weren't intimidated. We'll describe them later. The kids described them later by doing drawings. The drawings show them with big eyes, a big head, a small nose, kind of a slit for a mouth, dangling arms, and their bodies covered in a black uniform. Then the aliens start telepathically sending the students a message. And it was done kind of like they saw pictures in their head, like they were seeing a video or a movie. And they were shown 4 short movies. First, the smokestacks of, well, they show clouds of black smoke, factories, lots of stacks, like 20, 30 of them, kind of like I've seen along in Pittsburgh along the river. The message on that was air pollution. Next, they see a city in ruins, and this was after a nuclear war. So it was the new thing, and also about the nuclear facilities, how we're just not taking care of them. Then they see a river, and the river has got bottles and cans and trash and plastic, and that's water pollution. The final video shows kids with headphones, or like visors, and they are seeing technical stuff, and that was the tech pollution. And I got to experience this firsthand just a few years ago. I got custody of my 13-year-old granddaughter. She moved in for me. When she would get home from school, she'd walk in, and as she's walking in, she'd say, "Hi, Grandpa," but she still would be texting as she's walking, goes to her bedroom, and closes the door. Later, when I knock on the door to tell her it's time for dinner, I open the door. She's got her dogs and her hamster on her bed, along with her telephone where she's texting, and her computer that looks like she's playing some kind of, computer game. So they were just trying to stress about the tech pollution that could take us over. So the basic message to the students is that we are destroying our planet. Next, back to the students, the news media shows up, and they start interviewing the students. The first reporter is Tim Leach. He's a BBC correspondent, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation. The second interview was done by Cynthia Hine, and she's with ZBC, which is Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation. Now, skip ahead for a moment. 2 months later, the kids are traumatized. They're not sleeping. They're having bad dreams. The school brings in a famous psychiatrist who has experience with people who have dealt with aliens, experiencers from abductions, and kids interviews that had sighting. Dr. John Mack is a chief psychiatrist at Harvard University. He interviews the students. Now let's fast forward 20 years. In comes James Fox, a UFO researcher journalist, and he makes UFO documentaries, interviews the kids individually, and makes a documentary. And one last interview was done by Za. Za is special, and he's special because now he was a reporter. He was a witness 20 years ago, but he was only 5 years old, so they didn't interview him. He was too young. Why I mention this now is because after the 3 interviews by experienced reporters, a psychiatrist who's world-renowned, and James Fox doing documentary journalists, all 5 of them concluded that the kids were telling the truth. And this is 68 kids. Now, I'm going to add just a little new twist to that story, because 20 years later, to add credibility, they find a new witness, and her name is Kathy Bates. Kathy Bates was a teacher at the time of the incident, and she also was a witness, but she wouldn't talk about it then because she was afraid, since she was the only adult, that she was going to be ridiculed by her fellow teachers. Not only was she a witness, but she lived right on the school grounds. And during the landing, actually 2 days later, she got abducted by 2 aliens. And
Wow.
it was like beam me up, Scotty, for you Star Trek fans, as she described, they beamed her onto the ship. Kathy Bates, confesses that, she held it for 20 years. And since the kids were brave, today talking to James Fox, she was going to tell her story. Okay, back to the playground. At the end of the day, the kids go home. They start to tell their parents. The parents don't believe them. They're kind of pissed and they're kind of hurt. They were traumatized. So when they get back in school on Monday, the school headmaster is getting hundreds of phone calls from the parents, and they want to talk to him, and they want to know what's going on, what's his story. So he gathers the students who saw the UFO, and he has them write down the story separately, drawing pictures and telling their story. Again, everything matches the pictures and the stories. This UFO landing was definitely a close encounter of the third kind, so it was classified ultra top secret. Now they must create a cover story. The first story is this is simply mass hysteria and just a weather balloon. And a silly one was the traveling puppet show. It's all, of course, bullshit. There were 60 eyewitnesses. The kids were upset that the parents, even after 20 years, and the teachers still don't believe them. And this is an example of the biological effects, as we talked about in the observables. These kids were stressed big time. I mean, they not only saw flying saucers, they see a flying saucer land, they see aliens walk out, they receive messages, from the videos in their head, and then of course they see the saucer take off. So this is top level stress, because some people just seeing a UFO traumatizes them. An example of this was a guy that was in the military, 16 years. He was aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, and he was a cryptologist. So now imagine this is a guy who just saw this on his radar. And he got stressed out. And he's, like I said, he's on board the USS Roosevelt. He's an intelligence officer, 16 years in the Navy. He saw it on his radar. He knew it was non-human. His name is Matthew Roberts. He was so stressed out that he transferred to a desk job.
And he was an adult.
Yes, and then he retired, and he retired 4 years early. They get benefits after 20 years, but this was 16 years. So he had 4 years to go, and he quit because, like I say, the stress was just too much for him. And also, it was kind of weird. I wondered myself, I don't remember hearing this or why there was no story worldwide or in the major newspapers, or this should have been a top story, you would think, on the major networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, but they showed nothing. So I encourage everyone to check out this story for yourself. I use the internet, but it only gives you printed info. The book is in print. I tried to create a visual with words. So check out what I saw visually. It has a much greater impact. If you go to YouTube, the best video out there I found was using animation to reenact what happened. It is called Close Encounters, the Ariel School UFO, the Incident 3D, and this was by Mac Made Studios, and it was animated. And we're going to post this later so that you can connect to this story. most compelling because it shows a reenactment. But if you go to YouTube, there are 20-plus videos on Zimbabwe. Just put in Zimbabwe UFO story. The best ones out there are by Dr. John Mack, James Fox, and what's called the Y Files. And like I say, we will post links to these. Check out my many sources. See the interviews live and hear and see the kids' faces. And then you can listen to them and hear their voices also and figure out whether or not you think they're telling the truth. The video I mentioned, ask yourself when you're watching if these kids sound believable to you. The aliens' basic final message is that they are here to help Earthlings by preventing us from destroying the Earth. They hope that if one day they have to move here, we would welcome them. We could create our own crop circle. I picture a giant sign with a welcome mat saying, "Welcome aliens," and make it like a mile by a mile so they can see it from space. This is why I wrote this book, was to get people engaged, get involved, do the research, start talking to your family, your friends. Join us on our weekly podcast each week. We can explore the cosmics, expand your mind, and you can leave a comment or leave a question. And now I'd like to wrap things up today by telling you the podcast will be posted Wednesday at 12 noon, that's California time, and 3 o'clock Michigan time. And on Friday, it's going to be posted at 5 p.m. California time and 8 p.m. our time. And now I'm going to turn this over to our spirit lady and host, Robin Alexis.
Well, there's so much going on in my mind, Ken, as you were telling the story. And one of the things is, do you know which group of extraterrestrials visited those young children?
Well, there's no solid proof per se, but the Ebens seem most likely, because we know that the Ebens are a friendly alien race. They visit us on 4 different occasions, which there'll be a story one day on the Ebens himself. And they were friendly. They had made friends and visited 4 different times, including starting at Roswell, and we knew them to be a friendly race. We knew also they look similar to the Greys. In fact, they're considered like distant cousins of the Greys, but the Greys are the ugly cousins because they're mean. And we thought that the Ebens were much more friendly. So it's a good chance this looks like it was the Ebens. But again, we have no way to prove indeed that ship that landed in Zimbabwe was the Ebens.
Okay.
Robin, if we have time,
yes.
Can you tell us about how or why you wrote the book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials?
Well, that's a great question, because I wrote it because when I was a child, I was repetitively abducted. The particular abduction story that I talk about in A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, that occurred when I was 11 years old. I was with a friend who is still a friend of mine, and at this point, we're both 69 years old. But when we were 11, a ship appeared, and she saw it clear as day. And from the time she was 11, she kept drawing the picture of the ship. And she kept trying to tell people, including her parents, about the ship and about the experience, and nobody believed her. And I remembered being abducted, and it was one of the worst abduction experiences of my life. I actually remember being in the ship. I was pinned down. My eyes were pinned open, and they were doing experiments on my eyes. And I can remember trying to get out of the restraints. I can remember I was in a lot of pain. I could see what they looked like, and they said to me that they were doing experiments on my eyes because at some point it was going to help improve the human eyesight. And I was like, I don't ever remember having an agreement that I'd be abducted by aliens and that I would have something to do with that. And of course, whenever I would tell my parents or my family or community back then what I was experiencing, I was profoundly ridiculed. So the trauma, like what you were speaking about with these children, I experienced firsthand, and so did Cindy. But a couple of years ago, we reconnected through Facebook, and we decided that we would record a conversation between what she remembered and what I remembered, and I asked for the extraterrestrial who was speaking to me during the abduction at age 11 to talk to us now. And he did, and he calls himself Maxwell. So the point is, abductions, experiences with extraterrestrials, it is only going to increase. And how do we, as a community, as parents, how do we help ourselves and how do we help these kids who are having these traumatic experiences be able to cope? It kind of reminds me of the Me Too movement where, nobody talked for decades about women or children or whoever was being sexually violated. Well, now let's talk about how we've been violated in some circumstances by some extraterrestrials who didn't go about communicating with us in a very kind way. We happen to see that the Ebens were kind to these kids, and they delivered a message that was, filled with beneficence. And if you look around what's going on, we pretty much are failing at taking care of this planet. So I'm glad that the story is coming back up again so that we can take a look at what they were telling us and what can we each do in our own lives. Okay, I can actually feel the Ebens are, there's one Eben who's coming in to communicate, and he's specifically communicating with Ken. He's saying that Ken was easy to contact because he was open-minded, and that Ken is highly intelligent, and that the way that he can receive information, and code it in a way that is palatable to other humans, it's actually been established that it's easier for these different ET groups to communicate to one human who can then speak on behalf of what's been going on with the human race and these extraterrestrials, and have that human be the communicator than it is to perpetually try to communicate to each individual human. There was some talk about that with a show that we did earlier that we're going to have as a special edition where Maxwell, who abducted me at age 11, which is why I wrote the book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, he says, and now I'm seeing that the Eben is also agreeing, that there's been some damage to the human itself with how we're able to receive information, not only to one another, but also between ourselves and other species, other life forms. So this particular Eben, who's communicating right now, is saying that he communicated specifically to Ken, asked Ken to write his book, We're Not Alone and Here's the Proof, by Ken Sylvester. You can find it on Amazon. But then this Eben is also saying he participated in choreographing that Ken and I would meet, and we would create this podcast where we would begin to help humans understand the bigger picture of what's going on. Ken, does what this Eben say to you make sense?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Then we're kind of coming towards the end of the show. So is there anything that you want to communicate back to this Eben who showed up today for the show, or anything at all you want to say, Ken?
Yes, I could ask his continued guidance as I do the podcast in trying to translate in a shorter form what's inside the book. And I'm going kind of, chapter or story by story and giving them just a piece of what's in the book. And they would have to read the book to read the complete story, or there's 40 of them, so I don't know if we're going to get to do all 40. So hopefully they eventually can buy the book and read it and start to enjoy what they're reading.
Okay, this the Eben, he does want us to come up with a name for him. He knows that the mantis being called himself Maxwell, but this Eben who's communicating to you, he's inviting you, Ken, to give him a name. This particular Eben is saying that the shows that we have recorded that we didn't think we were necessarily going to be using after this show, he is encouraging us to. He says that after this particular show, that the other shows will make sense in understanding what Maxwell was sharing about the human anatomy and why it's been difficult for the humans to comprehend and assimilate what our space brothers and space sisters, some who are kind, some who are not, just like humans, what they've been trying to tell us. And so, and as we move forward and we share different things that may seem overwhelming, it's an opportunity for people who are listening to the show to email us. Email us at spiritladyrobin@gmail.com. Ask us your questions. We will answer them on the show. Even if you don't come on as a guest, if you send us the questions, we will discuss them on the show. We will ask the Eben. We will ask Maxwell. We will get information for you. Now, we do encourage you to learn more about our books. You go to Amazon, you search for We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof by Ken Sylvester, and look for the book A Conversation with Extraterrestrials by Robin Alexis. The Eben who is here says again he's very good friends with Ken, that he actually knew at preconception that he and Ken would be communicating and that Ken would be teaching about the extraterrestrial activity on planet Earth. And so that particular Eben is backing up a little bit here. He knows the show's coming to an end. And so remember, everybody, to when you do get Ken's book, you can look at the front of the book about what the observables are, so that when you happen to see a UFO, you will be able to figure out what it is. And also, just remember to stay tuned to our show, Mystic Radio with Robin Alexis, with special guest Ken Sylvester. Stay happy, stay looking up at the sky, and choose love. Thank you for a wonderful show.
One last note, Robin.
Yes.
Is let's call this Eben, tell him his name is George.
Oh, he loves that. Okay, thank you, George.
We'll call him George.
You, Maxwell.
in our next show, we're going to be traveling to another school in Melbourne, Australia.
Oh, Melbourne, Australia. I'm looking forward to that. All right. Until next time, namaste.